Welcome to the very first podcast of the French Pod. This channel has been on my mind for years, and I'm happy to share with you that it's finally starting now. The French Pod is a very simple concept. It's about trying to better understand the world that we live in, but with a bit of a French twist to it, since I guess you can hear that I'm French, and I can't hide my accent that much. The French Pod is about interviewing specialists in their respective fields, but not just specialists or experts. Humans. We're all humans and we all have our own personal life stories. So not only do the topics that will be covered interest me, but the human stories around them just as much. Over the next few months, I'll be interviewing numerous people on a variety of subjects, from super athletes to physicists, startup founders, potentially wine masters because I'm secretly quite into wine, psychologists, philosophers, and so on, and we'll see where it goes. It's still very low budget, so don't have such high expectations for now, especially towards this very first attempt at a podcast. In any case, I'm super excited to welcome you on this journey. I hope you will enjoy the ride and learn new stuff alongside me. If you like the following content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And today, I'll be receiving a lobbyist working within the EU bubble, as we call it. But he's not any random lobbyist. After growing up in India, Tanveer decided to make a move to Europe to finish his many years of study and start working as a lobbyist within the European Union. We'll be going through his expertise on what lobbying is, how the EU institutions operate, and how to become a good lobbyist, as well as his personal journey of coming to Europe and working within the EU without being European at all. This is the French Pod. My name is Seb, and allow me now to introduce you to Tanveer, Ahmed. And we're live. Thank you for being here. Tanveer, maybe let's start with a bit of an introduction about your background, where you grew up. Obviously, you grew up in India. I'd be curious to know what it was like, etc.
First of all, thank you, Sebastian, for having me. It's great to be here. Congratulations on the first of many, I hope, of a big venture, and I hope that things work out very successfully for you, as much as my journey from India has. It seems to have worked out quite successfully considering I'm here.
Yeah.
But growing up in India, I can tell you it's a lot of heat to begin with. When French people and local Europeans over here chase the sun, I used to find it very strange when I first came here because I was under the impression, why would you chase the sun? You go away from it, you find shade. But now also I'm slowly becoming Europeanized, and that it's a sunny day and I really started appreciating it. So that's always there. But besides that, growing up in India, from an academic and an education perspective, it is incredibly competitive. Because if you have 1.3 billion people who are continuously fighting to make it to the top, there is an enormous amount of competition at every single level, which is the reason why the stereotype that Indians are good at math, Indians are good at computer science, Indians are good at the sciences and so on, it sticks. Because if in India you need to be average, you need to be quite good by European standards. Otherwise, you will not make it into university. And if you don't make it into university, you're not going to do your master's. You won't do your PhD. You won't be going outside of the country, on the continent, for you to make a living, for you to have this education. Wow. So competition is enormous at all levels. And it often picks up when you're entering high school, and then from high school to university. Yeah. Most universities only want to pick you if you are... they have entrance examinations, which have... 910,000 million and a half people writing every single year for a university, and the number of seats that are available are about 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 seats sometimes. Like if you want to study something you really like, you have to be
The best at it.
the best.
Yeah.
And it also translates for a very consequently in your career as well, it translates. Because if you've studied well and you go to a high ranking university, and if you do a good degree over there, your creme de la creme of employers, be it your consulting firms, they only go to those universities. They offer the highest amount of money. So unless you are there by making your effort from the start, your progress also can be limited after a point of time. So it's a cycle in that. I wouldn't call it vicious, but it's a competitive cycle.
Okay. And so, but it's are all the fields competitive, or is it only like engineering, math, computer science, or do you feel like all of the subjects really are competitive?
The way social media has democratized careers these days, everything has become competitive. But when I was growing up, competition was limited. Depending on it also depends a lot on the geography of the country where you are from. So I'm originally from the south, from a city called Chennai. We eat a lot of rice. Our food is very spicy, and I grew up 15 minutes from the beach for 25 years of my life. So I'm a water person. I love being next to water. That's the thing. But and in Chennai, it was formerly known as Madras, and Madras was one of the three biggest cities slash provinces of the erstwhile British Empire. Therefore, there were a lot of trade, commerce, and education happened in Madras, now Chennai. The other two centers were Kolkata, or Calcutta as it was known before, and Bombay, which is Mumbai of present day. So these were the three provinces of the UK, of the erstwhile British Empire, and Chennai being one of them, had a lot of trade and commerce and industry going on. So a lot of educated people often congregated in these three regions of the country. And in these regions, you would often maybe it may not be entirely true, but due to the industrial heritage that these three regions possess, engineering disciplines are often given more importance. After that, you have medical, so doctors have a lot of importance. Lawyers have a lot of importance afterwards. But if you want policy people, if you want government people, they often find themselves within the confines of the capital region. So in New Delhi, because you have your policy making bubble, your government apparatus for the entire country, primarily situated in that geographical environment. Lots of students who want to do arts education, want to study history, international relations, political sciences, find themselves in Delhi, and the best universities to offer this education is also over there. So
it's also like there is some regional areas where it's going to be more competitive, maybe on certain because the universities are going to be better, and you're going to have higher chances at making it out there.
Yes, indeed. If you want to study arts, and if you come to Chennai, or it is easy for you to get into a moderately decent university. Yes, but the quality of the degree, how well it is recognized, will not be the same as you're going to. It's like studying in Sciences Po or studying in Bordeaux University. I don't know. Maybe Bordeaux is good.
Be careful.
Maybe it's good. I don't know. But I know Sciences Po is very good for these kind of education.
No, you're right. Sciences Po is definitely up there. But anyway, so obviously you come from India. There is all those different differences of regions and studies, and the competitive spirit between students, and like the difficulty to really have a good career in a certain field. What then led you to come all the way from India to Europe? I guess it's not to get out of the competition, because it's very competitive here as well. So yeah, what was that process in your mind?
The process was so I used to work in the communication / speech writing team of a politician back in India. And at that point of time, I only knew a career required that you did an MBA. That's all that's all that I do. I have done engineering. I didn't like engineering. I wanted to branch out. I did a master's in sociology that gave me a little bit of interest in politics. So while I was working in politics, I figured, okay, if I do an MBA, natural transition, more money, and then you move on. Money was my primary motivator at that point of time. But then colleagues in this firm that I was working with introduced me to the world of policy, and they said that you don't have to do a business administration degree. You could do a policy degree, and then this could potentially be your entire life. So that was my first exposure to policy as an academic field that you could pursue and make a career out of.
So that was still in India?
That was still very much in India. Okay. And then my first exposure to the EU and EU policy making happened very close to, I think it was the FA Cup semi-final.
The football reference.
Football reference, of course. It was. So I'm a big Chelsea fan. From 2006, it's been my team. And I don't remember who it was playing, but it was an FA Cup semi-final game for Chelsea. And what happened was, all the websites that I used to track football and track soccer, or football, not soccer, across the EU disappeared overnight because GDPR came into effect.
Yeah, the new regulations.
Indian institutions, Indian service providers did not want to give the necessary importance GDPR needs to be given, because it's also financially expensive them for to comply with GDPR regulations, to maintain EU users' data, EU networks data on Indian servers. So what did they do? They just took their hands up and said, we're not going to deal with this. So all websites disappeared overnight. I missed the semi-final. It was really bothering. But then a little bit more research, I realized that GDPR is something that exists. This is a law. This is affecting the entire world. So my first exposure to, as they say, the Brussels effect was GDPR, and how it completely changed my football watching habits. Then exploring it a bit more, speaking to policy people, and I understand that it's essential, or policy as an institution. Don't get me wrong, of course, Indian policy making is very important. Chinese policy making is very important. In the current geopolitical scenarios, they have their own enormous roles to play, and they have an enormous impact on everybody else. But in spite of having said that, I still believe that the world has two big policy centers. One is Brussels, one is DC, Washington, DC. So traditionally, what these people do has the most impact on the entire world. And I wanted to come to Europe for a very long time. And so I started applying to schools, applied to a school in the UK, applied to a school in Singapore, and applied to my school in Berlin.
Just to pause here, so you didn't look for a job straight away?
Oh, no.
You were like, because maybe it was strategically more, it was easier strategically to get in through a student, like a university course, or did you also consider this path of like straight away finding a job?
Straight away finding a job was never in the, was not there. I had no idea what I needed to do. I knew I wanted to work
you weren't certain.
No, I wanted to work in policy. So the clarity that I had when I was applying was I wanted to work in policy. I wanted to understand European policy making, so I wanted to go to a European policy institute.
Yeah.
This was all that I knew. So because of the European focus, the Singaporean institute was out of running for me. It was still Asia, and I wanted a different experience. The UK was prohibitively expensive, so it was not going to financially be viable for me to move over there. And I studied at the Hertie School of Governance in Berlin, and I got a scholarship from the German government that took care of my living expenses considerably, so it made a lot of sense for me to move over there. So I moved over there. Also, I'm a big fan of the German football team.
Nice.
So it was nice to be in Berlin because of the same thing.
Cool.
So I moved over there, started working over there, started studying over there, of course. And that's when I got more exposed to the EU and EU institutions and the EU as an apparatus, and how important Germany is as a member state. And we have German elections as well.
Today,
as we speak. So in a couple of hours, we should have an understanding of who has won. It doesn't seem very great based on the exit results. But so Germany happened, studying there happened, met all these people. And then they introduced me to, Brussels is also a nice place to go. And that's how the introduction happened. Okay. But moving to Brussels is a different story, and it's because it also involves a bureaucratic nightmare.
Yeah, because you were still on a student visa at the time in Berlin.
Yes.
Then did you get a job in Berlin first, or?
I was working in Berlin with a French company called Capgemini.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of you heard of it.
Yeah.
So they had a division on focusing on the European public sector. So how can we help European public sector organizations digitize, use AI, so on and so on.
Wow.
So it was helping the public sector organization.
Yeah, to innovate.
To innovate
A
and
little.
to become digital. A little. It's very, slight transgression, but it really bothered me when I moved to Berlin, because
How slow everything was and like old school, or?
honestly, this is a real problem, because when I came to Berlin and I had to buy my own mobile phone connection, I was paying, I remember it was 20 euros for about 2 or 3 GB of data, and that lasted me 28 days. In India, I used to get 2 gigabytes of data. I was paying 3.5, 4 euros a month, and I was getting 2 gigabytes of high-speed data, besides unlimited calls and text, but I was getting 2 gigabytes of high-speed data every single day. So every morning I wake up, I'm getting 2 gigabytes of data. In Germany, a first world country, the beacon of everything that is progress and development, I'm paying 20 euros for 2 gigabytes of data for a month. it really bothered me on a fundamental level that I thought I moved to a first world country, man. It shouldn't be here this way. Things are changing a bit, thankfully, over here. Currently, at least in Belgium, it's better. But this dichotomy really caught me by shock.
Yeah.
But coming back to
You were working in Berlin for Capgemini.
yes, I was working in Berlin for Capgemini. That I was still a student back then.
Yeah.
But, and COVID struck.
Was it an internship then?
No, I was a full-time student employee.
Okay.
So I was working 40 hours a week, and I started as a student job, as they say, 20 hours. That was in my third semester, and then in fourth semester, March, COVID struck. At that point of time, it was just me having master thesis to do and online classes, and I had a bit more time. And the German government is also lenient in allowing you to work full time if you don't have until a certain period of time. You have to convert your visa, of course. But then my visa allowed me to work for about 6 months full time or a year part time. So I chose that the possibility to work full time for those 6 months because I knew I was transitioning outside of a student visa to something else. So effectively, for about a year, I worked full time in Capgemini, and that was good. And then took a short break, went back home, came back again in the interest of finding a job in Berlin. So when I came back, I had converted into what is called a job seeker visa. So if you've studied in the university or if you studied in a nation, they often allow you to stay for a period of time, be it depending on the place. I remember that the UK was also shown to me as not a viable option because of this requirement is that after you graduated from a university in the UK, you were only allowed to stay for 3 months to look for a job.
Oh, wow.
Which surprisingly changed because of Boris Johnson, who realized that they needed more skilled employees post-Brexit. So they changed this, I believe, from 3 to 24 months. So now you can stay longer, but during my time, it was not the case. So and in Berlin, in Germany, you're allowed to stay for 18 months. So I got my visa converted, and then I was looking and I was applying. So while I was applying, there was a firm that I had interviewed for, which I really liked because they pay very well. They were doing EU affairs work in Berlin. And most importantly, there was no requirement for me to be a mother tongue fluent German speaker, which was a consistent hindrance when you are looking for jobs in the policy space, at least. So I was quite adamant, and losers can't be choosers. So if you don't speak the language, you can't choose exactly the career that you want in this field. So a lot of my colleagues and friends at that point of time digressed. They started picking jobs in business development, in marketing, because for them, it was important to stay in Berlin as much as it was to have a job. For me, it was very clear that if I did not get a job where I wanted to, in a field that I wanted to work, I was happy to go back home. So I made peace with that. So I was very keen that, okay, I wanted to work in comms, in public affairs, public relations. So this firm came up, and the good firm, even today it's a very well-reputed firm. They have an office in Brussels as well. I interviewed with them, and I went 5 rounds, and I spoke to, I think, 11 or 13 consultants. And they have a policy of unanimity that everybody should say yes.
Everybody has to agree with you being the next employee.
One person said no, so they said, okay, we can't take him.
Wow.
I got this from the managing director of the firm, who I can consider a mentor right now because I speak to him outside of work. I ask him for advice, and he told me that, yes, we couldn't pick you because one person decided to say no, even though we really liked your candidature. So that kind of sucked.
Yeah.
But then what worked out for me was that I think one of the assistants who had a list of names of who had interviewed with this particular firm in the last 6 months shared this particular list with my now former boss, a British gentleman by the name of Rory Chisholm. Happy to give him a shout out. He's the reason why I'm here.
Oh, really?
He's the reason why I am here. So Rory reached out to me on LinkedIn, and my initial impressions was that this is a scam. Because why is the managing partner of a firm reaching out to me, a lowly foot soldier,
after you got refused
by some company? I don't even know who he is. So he reached out to me on LinkedIn and said, oh, I see you're open to work. This is what it is. Would you be interested in joining the firm? I said that. And he said, you know what, let's chat. I know, because my initial impression was a scam, but he sent me his email, transparency register, website, everything, and said, let's chat. So I did my own digging, and then my friend said, it's just a chat. You don't have anything to lose. Talk to him. I spoke to him. Then I realized that this is actually a legitimate offer, legitimate position. Mm-hmm. And he said, listen, then I asked him, like, where and how you heard about me. He didn't tell me at the start, but after I was recruited and everything, then is when he told me that his assistant was, so he previously used to work at the same firm.
Yeah.
But that interviewed me in Berlin. And the assistant from there sent him this list of names that of all the people who we interviewed in the last 6 months, Tanveer was the only one who made it through the entire rounds, all 5 rounds. So if we didn't pick him for whatever reason, if you want, give him a try.
Wow.
So that's how he got my name.
Okay.
So that's how he got my name. So he reached out to me and then he said, listen, we still have to do a formal interview process. I think you can do the job, but you need to convince my colleagues. Completely understandable. So had 2 or 3 rounds of interviews at a firm over here. And after that, they picked me. And
So now we're in Brussels, huh?
now we're in Brussels. This is 24th August 2021. Yeah, after we graduated, after Capgemini, after home, coming back.
But the whole process of, the legal process of being legally able to work in Brussels wasn't done yet.
No.
Just at the first step of trying to find the job.
Yes.
And then starts the whole,
Yes.
a whole other world.
The reason why I think it's perfectly reasonable to say I am forever in debt to Rory Chisholm is because it is very easy for you to pick a junior who has just graduated or who already has an internship at the commission or the parliament or the council, has a European citizenship, speaks probably 3 to 5 European languages, has lived in Brussels, and is not as much of a bureaucratic nightmare to hire compared to somebody like me. The only reason I'm in Brussels today is because Rory insisted that he wants me. So even though that on the 24th of August in 2021, I got my offer letter, the day I joined my company was the 3rd of November. So that's September and October.
But they helped you?
Yeah, they apply for my visa. So you are under the mercy of your employer.
Okay. Because not all companies are willing to do that.
Not
huh?
all companies are willing to do that, especially not for a junior.
It's really rare.
And the reason for that is because you need to meet a certain salary threshold to be eligible for this visa. As a junior, you often don't meet the salary threshold. Why? Because same reason. There are people who are fighting to join the Brussels bubble as interns who are willing to work for absolutely nothing just so that they can get an opportunity to be here. Yeah. So at that point of time, to justify paying somebody like me at a certain threshold without the experience that other people have really requires the kindness of someone. Someone needs to believe in you and someone needs to take the shot on you. Yeah. And Rory was a person who believed in me.
Wow. Amazing story. Yeah. Thanks to Rory.
Thanks to Rory, always. Every time I do any career change or academic achievement,
you let him know, yeah.
I just send him a message saying, hey, Rory, I'm always grateful. Thanks for everything.
Yeah, it's amazing. All right. So then you moved to Brussels and then you really got into this lobbying world, I suppose. So for how many years have you been in Brussels for now?
Oh, it'll be 4 years in the summer.
Okay, 4 years this summer. How was your integration in Brussels? Obviously, Rory was he there? No.
He was there. Now he moved back to the UK. He was there when I first joined. He was there, but then he moved back to the UK.
How was your experience as an Indian to be around only European citizens, I suppose? I remember reading on LinkedIn some posts mentioning a bit of racism that you went through. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit on how this whole integration process was?
So there's the racism that I have experienced outside of the academic and the Brussels bubble environment. That happened only once. I was coming out of the basic fit in Madhu, and then somebody looked at me and asked me to very politely go back to my country. He even switched to English so that I would understand the message. So that was fun. That happened, and then I was just laughing at what? I didn't do anything to you, bro. He just walked up, you said something, and then he went. So I'm like, okay, this is it. But within the work environment, the academic environment, it's I've had an explicit racist comment thrown towards me, which may not sound directly racist, but of course I was told that I'm not European, so I cannot work in EU policy, and I will not be good enough for this. And Europeans and the person pointed out to the rest of the office saying, everybody out there has grown up in this environment and they can do this better than you. And you can't do it their way. So don't try to become better. Just go do something you're already good at. So this is the one that I say was the most explicit form of discrimination that somebody told me to my face. And once I heard this, I remember I left the office. I went in front of the Robert Schumann statue on Park Song Contenaire, sat in front of that. I called my mom and I was crying like, Mom, this person just said this to me. It feels like my career is coming to an end. Like, how can somebody say this? So that's the most explicit statement you have. And the implicit form of racism, which you will see a lot, and this is something I've
It's like by looks, by
not
the
just by
way
looks.
people are.
No. But that is also a part of it. Like, there have been, as a junior when I first began, there are a lot of instances where I would go up into a room and try to speak to people, and they will give me a look that, what are you doing here? Are you here for the food? Are you here just to chat? Do you even know anything? So this is something that I first did. And I've also spoken to a lot of POC colleagues who work in the Brussels bubble who give very similar stories, that they're not taken serious enough. And people with, sadly, double jeopardy is the word, like people of color who are also women, they find things twice as difficult even to be considered seriously. That's one thing. And the most implicit and most frequent and consistent form of racism I faced is double standards. What is double standards? It's I'll give you examples. It's things like, I have been told, and my other colleagues from person of color background have also been said, is you need to consistently justify as to why you are here. So you hear statements like, this is something I have heard, like, you're not worth your salary. You are not grateful for the fact that we have hired you over here. You are not showing us.
So you owe them something in return?
Yes. You're not grateful for the fact that we have taken a chance on you, that we have sponsored your visa, and you're not justifying the salary that you get. Do you know how much I make? And there have been people who keep on telling me, you're not justified. You know how much we pay you? Do you know how much we pay you? Honestly, yes, it is a considerable amount. It's, let's say, I don't know the figures right now, but when I was being hired, so this was 2020, 2021, you need to be paid a minimum of 44,000 a year to be eligible for a work visa. People who just start in the Brussels bubble, they get paid, depending on how good and generous the firm is, it varies, of course.
Yeah.
But in the same firm that I was working when I first joined, they were paying, I believe it was on 37 to 38,000. So yes, it is an increase by about 6,000 to 7,000 euros a year. So it's not a joke. It is a decent amount, but you're not paying me 500,000 more for you to consistently tell me and remind me at every single point of time, oh, you're not being paid. Do you know how much you're being paid? And this is another thing. This is a very interesting nuance, is that in my culture, when you move to a different city, the best way to make friends is to invite people for food. Everybody wants to try Indian food. See, I made all my friends in Berlin like this, is that I would tell them, if I just met somebody and I liked them, I'd say, hey, listen, come to my place, bring 5 friends. You decide. So you plus 5 friends are invited to my house. I will cook for everyone. I'm new. I just want to meet people. So then they come, they eat my food, they like it, and they decide I'm also a half-decent human being and agree to be my friend. This is how it's worked throughout Berlin.
Wow.
So I moved to Brussels, and for me, this is what has worked my entire life. So I moved, and at my first workplace, I was inviting people left, right, and center. Hey, I'd be happy to have you. Why don't you come home? Please come home. Happy to cook for you. Please bring your friends, whatever, so on and so forth. Word got around that I was showing off that I had more money because I'm on a visa and I'm being paid a little bit more. Compared to them.
Oh, wow.
So, a very senior person started telling people that Tanveer is showing off that he makes more money.
So they went around your back and they started telling people off in the ecosystem of whatever.
Basically, what does Tanveer think? Just because he makes more money, he can invite people over, he can throw parties whenever he wants. Is he showing off that he's making all this money and making all my teammates feel bad? So somebody else, a well-wisher at that point of time, came and told me, stop doing this. I understand that it's a cultural thing for you to invite people, but the way people are perceiving it is they think you're showing off because you make more money.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it's quite special. It's I wanted to comment also on this because it's from my perspective of being outside kind of this bubble. It looks like the EU is really trying to do better on those things, and it looks like they're really trying to push this agenda of fighting racism, discrimination, xenophobia, and all those things. But then, from your experience, it seems like there's so much work still to be done on the inside. Like the inside of the EU still and it's like completely the opposite of what they're pushing on the outside. And so maybe last question before we move into lobbying, do you feel like this racism, this double standard that is enforced on you comes from like usually the same type of people, from like same like senior people that maybe have a certain age, or do they come from a certain, I don't know, background, country, whatever?
No.
Or it happens anywhere.
Anywhere and everywhere. If I may add, the person who told me explicitly that you're not European, you can't work over here, is a European person of color. Like they're from France. They have a migration background themselves. They are a person of color.
Wow.
But then they were like, no, you can't work over
That's
here.
crazy.
So it comes from everywhere, anywhere.
Yeah.
And the same set of people who have been discriminatory towards me and tried to put whatever blocks in my career, for if there are 10 people like that, there have been 1,000 people who are helpful, who are kind. And there are people, the reason why I'm here is because at some point of time, I decided to listen to the others who pushed me forward, who kept on telling me, policy making is not rocket science. Anybody can learn it. You can do it too. You can push it too. So it's these kind of people who I'm very grateful for.
And not caring about the few that have been.
That's the thing, Sam.
It's hard.
If I tell you that I don't care, I'm lying.
Yeah, it's very hard not to care.
It really bothers me. And even today, even till this date, sometimes I think about things that these people have said and certain moments where it may not be racist as well, but I mean, of course, I'm not saying everything is racist. Some of them are explicit. Some of them are just, people are a-holes.
Yeah. It's just the way they are.
So you face this as well. So we deal with these things.
Well, maybe let's move to lobbying and get into the details of this of the heart of this podcast. And thank you for all this introduction. It allows us, I guess, to really understand better where you come from, the whole process of coming here, because you're not European and you work within the EU bubble. There is, I guess, very few of you in the EU bubble that are not European citizens, although you might become a European citizen one day, right? But anyway, so let's talk about lobbying. Can you maybe start by giving a small definition of what lobbying is?
Lobbying is basically advocating for your interests.
Okay.
So your interests may not align with somebody else's interests, but your interests are as legitimate as somebody else's interests, of course. And the EU, thankfully, allows you to have a medium to advocate for your interests by speaking to parliamentarians, speaking to commission people, because the EU hopes and tries its hardest to be a representative body. And to be a representative body, you need to make sure that you hear all voices, even as big as they are and even as small as they are. So lobbying is advocating for your interests. That is how I would put it.
Okay, so the medium, lobbyists are this medium in between, because you say anybody's interest, but it's really companies' interests, or it's also associations, it's also individuals?
It's companies.
All of those?
So the reason why I say companies and associations and not individuals is because more often than not, a collective has more voice, has more power, and therefore are heard easier compared to an individual. Unless the individual is, let's say we're talking about the AI Act, and you have someone like Google. They are a company, but in the Brussels policy landscape, they are an individual. They are one company pushing their interests. So yes, they are an important voice because they affect the lives of so many other people. In comparison to smaller firms, which may not have the same impact or same footprint as Google, they tend to often become a part of associations. You have a lot of digital associations. This one called CCIA, the Computer Communications Association, the Digital Europe. Then there's a Coalition for App Fairness, which I think in this space does a lot of very good work because they tend to keep the big tech in check. And then there's another person whose association I'm forgetting, but his name, he's an individual who actually made a lot of difference. His name is Max Schrems. He is from Austria, and he runs a think tank of sorts. And his primary job is to sue big tech for violating individual consumer rights. I think I don't recall at the moment, but I think there was a lot to do on privacy rights. His name is Max Schrems. So individuals like that, of course, will disappear because they have a small voice in the Indian lobbying landscape, for example, because lobbying in India is illegal. Where you have more money, you get your voice heard. Thankfully, the EU makes sure that even an individual like Max Schrems can get his voice heard in comparison to somebody like Google.
Okay. How do you measure whether you are a good lobbyist or not?
You can't.
You can't measure it.
You really can't. This is something everybody. It's very difficult for you to. These KPIs, as they say, key performance incentives. Indicators. Yes, there we go. Right. A company or an association comes to you with their position. You take their position, you speak to parliamentarians, you speak to commission people, you try to push this as much as possible. In the final legislation, there is a possibility that what you have said is reflected, or there's a possibility that it's not reflected, or there is a possibility that it's reflected to a certain extent. So you find a compromise, something like that. So it is, and large goals are difficult to quantify in terms of, yes, this amendment in this part is exactly what we wrote, which is the reason why. It's quite difficult to say. Okay. But if you see the after effect of the legislation to have included what you are asking for, is a good way to measure that you've done your homework and you've achieved your goals.
Yeah, and if it doesn't end up being included in this new legislation, whatever you pushed for, as long as you did your maximum,
yes,
then also that's a way maybe to measure, because no matter if it's going to be a success or a failure, if you did your best. Because I'm thinking, if I was like your manager,
yes,
for what reasons could I fire you, basically? If you can't measure, how good a lobbyist is, for which reasons can you fire someone? Well, I guess it's the amount of work that they do, the way they maybe negotiate or like try to push for how they manage meetings, whatever. I guess there is a lot of interpersonal skills required.
Definitely, that is the case. You need to be. Again, interpersonal skills are important, but that doesn't mean only extroverts can be lobbyists.
That doesn't mean
only extroverts can be lobbyists.
Extroverts.
Yes, you have a lot of introverts who sit, work, and do their part as well. Like within my experience of lobbying, especially at the association that I'm currently in, the European Automobile Manufacturers Association, so we represent the interests of all your big car, truck, bus, van manufacturers in Europe.
Yeah,
is that there is a clear distinction between policy people and public affairs people. So your public affairs people, if you're not an extroverted public affairs person, it's not a problem, but you are probably starting off 3 steps behind the rest. Because the public affairs person's primary role is to make sure that they can convince the parliamentarian sitting on the other end about what the industry is saying. So these people, they have to be people persons. They have to go out, they have to network, they have to speak to people. And then there are policy managers. Policy managers are the brains behind what the public affairs people say. Because the public affairs people have lines to take, which they will go and they will try and make sure to convince people. But if the discussion becomes a bit more technical, they will call your policy guys, and the policy guys show up, and they will lead the discussions from that end. So the policy people focus and work a lot more with the industry. So they work with the car companies or the chemical companies or the tech companies. But public affairs people work with the institutions.
The other side.
So you are on this side. And it is important to have the bridge between the policy and public affairs. That happens at an association, because policy people, they have a little better understanding of the policy, but because they also have public affairs, if not background, but they know how the EU works, and they know how the EU speaks and how they need to simplify it. It is their job to take the relatively technical language that comes from policy people, simplify it to the point that a public affairs person or public affairs people themselves are good, but simplify it to the point that a parliamentarian or a politician who has no idea about AI privacy or cyber resilience will also, or CO2 emissions, who will also understand the same thing. Because
the way you're going to phrase it is going to be different.
Exactly.
And more adapted to the person you're talking to.
Policy people will formulate it in a manner that the public affairs people can understand it. The public affairs people will then formulate it in a manner that the layman can understand. And the layman is your politician.
Okay, very good to know. And PR has nothing to do with any of that, right? It's another category.
PR is a completely different category. So PR, as I say, is that communications and PR being a one branch.
Yeah.
As for the larger public, for the general public,
Yeah.
public affairs and lobbying is very targeted.
Yeah, exactly.
This is changing, of course. I don't have the expertise, but there's a new domain of policy communication coming up, where people are focusing on communicating
To the public,
to the
in
public
a way
in a
that is
way that-
also addressed to the
yes,
EU
there's some
institutions.
nuance in that, wherein policy and policy terms are more communicated rather than general advertising or marketing campaigns, because communications has traditionally been associated with being a nice ad, a good ad, something that feels good, a good tweet. But as policies start affecting people beyond, and how social media is making sure that everybody is interested in every policy and everybody has an opinion. Recently, we also had some people, a particular person call Asaya their besties, and there was an interesting video that they made, and I wanted to clarify that no, we are not your bestie. Just want to put that out there. But so when everybody has an opinion, everybody has a voice. These things becomes important to make the
Okay,
distinction.
very good to know. So policy communications, a new trend to that is
It is
currently
definitely a
arriving
trend,
now between policy, PA, PR.
Yes,
we could
I
say.
think that's the best way to put it. And I
Yeah.
don't have the knowledge or the expertise, but there are some very smart people who are working in the policy com space, and
They're
they
doing
can,
some
they can
very
speak much
cool,
better for this.
Nice. So, yeah, another question on lobbying. From my perspective on the outside, I feel like there's a lot of potentially secrets being shared. You know, it's like we don't. I feel like lobbyists can access information before everyone else. And so, do you feel like there is some secret information that is being shared between lobbyists, companies, and institutions beforehand, or is there a very transparent way of sharing information with everyone online?
When it comes to sharing information, my opinion, maybe I'm wrong, but is that information is always public. Strategies are private. The way somebody lobbies, the way they want to say their messaging, that of course can be dependent on what the member wants or the client wants. But at the end of the day, if you have to make a position on a particular file saying this is what the industry is saying, that has to be public. And it is that is widely circulated. But to reach a public position is not easy, because you have a lot of internal negotiations. You speak to your members, and some of them work very easily. Some of them have, and it is very difficult to reach a consensus for an association on a particular position if even one member blocks it.
Yeah.
So there lies the difficulty. So and these internal squabbles, conversations, they are private, of course, but they are again very much compliant to European competition
Yeah, of
law
course, of
standard,
course.
because tomorrow the commission can knock at any time and say, give us your meeting minutes. We heard that there is some kind of collusion happening over here. We want to investigate. And at that point of time, we are obligated
To
to
share.
share all the information. But it is not obligated on us to share it to the general public unless and until
Okay, very interesting. Let's talk about ethics within this whole lobbying world.
Of course.
From an external perspective also, there's been some lobbying, for example, for tobacco, nicotine, you know, all those things, vapes and stuff, which I guess could be considered as unethical lobbying, if you think from a health perspective. Are you aware of other unethical lobbyings? Do you agree first with what I'm saying, that there is some unethical lobbying that exists out there, or not?
Seb, what is ethics? What do you think?
It's based on a certain set of values, of virtues, I guess. It goes back to the Greek virtues, I would say, ethics and philosophy, and yeah. But again, it's very subjective, so you can go all ways.
But do you agree that ethics has a social dimension to it? Ethics is not about one person. Ethics is about what the society does. Okay? It's not about what you think or what I think. It's about what everybody thinks.
Yeah, true.
Okay? That's a very important part of ethics that people often overlook. So when you think about this aspect, we have to consider everybody's opinion. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter.
One man?
One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. So if you view this as bad, there are a bunch of other people who you can find out as it's necessary, it's important. So this is an issue. So, this is my personal opinion, of course, is that lobbying, as long as it's transparent and it's declared and it's out there, it's ethical.
It's ethical.
Because you are following
Yeah.
procedures that have been set by the institutions, by society, everybody knows. There's nothing secretive happening over there. Whether it is moral or not is a different question. Tobacco lobbying may not be moral, but if everything is in place, in process, due procedure is followed, it is ethical. They are doing everything according, they're not hiding, there's no bribery involved. That is unethical, of course.
Yeah.
So if you're having under the table dealings, that is of course unethical. But lobbying per se is not, not all lobbying is unethical. I think lobbying, because it's institutionalized, works that way. It is fine. But there are immoral lobbies, of course.
Exactly.
Nicotine
So
lobbies
immoral.
could be one of them.
Very good answer. Great. Now let's talk, I guess, about your personal convictions from this whole world, right? As a lobbyist, can you follow your personal convictions on certain subjects, or do you have to remain neutral and really, or then your job makes impacts your convictions, as in what you push for become your convictions? Or have you been in a situation where you had to push for something that you don't agree with, for example?
The opposite has happened for me.
Really?
Is that I was on,
You were against something that you pushed and you became for it?
and I started realizing why. I'm happy to explain this a bit further. Is the case that the auto industry is facing right now, which is on electrification, having electric cars. So I've always been, if I have to put myself on the political number line in the EU, I would say I'm a socialist. I would vote for the S&D. That's where I stand. If I have to choose or bit more, if I have to move a bit away from my party, I only see myself voting for the Greens, but I wouldn't jump into the Liberals or the Conservatives. No, it's either 70 to 80% Socialists, Democrats, maybe a bit of Greens. The environment is very important. Don't get me wrong. It is essential. We need to ensure that we don't take too many resources right now so that people of future generations also have access to the same resources that we've had. But having said this, again, let me underline, this is my opinion. I do not speak for my association or anybody else. Is that when it comes to electric cars, a lot of people don't realize that electrification, or at least electric cars, are an instrument of privilege. If your commute and if your requirement for a car is to go to work, to go to gym, to go to your weekend party, or go somewhere nearby for shopping and groceries, and if your entire route can be done within, say, 20 to 30 kilometers, electric cars work, and they're very important, and they are definitely the future. But if your route is that you live outside of Brussels or outside of your main city, and you need to travel 20, 30, 40 kilometers every single day, and then you need to make sure that you have, and you don't travel this once in a while. Every day, 20, 30 one way, so it's like 60 to 80 kilometers per day.
Yeah.
But then you have to charge it, and if you don't, and if you live in an older apartment, like there are huge sections of Europe which are big apartment blocks, say in places like in Eastern Europe or in Eastern Germany as well, considering the old the communist era that they were part of, where they don't have an excess amount of charging infrastructure that's present. Like there is no charging infrastructure in my apartment. My entire street has 2 charging spots.
Yeah, you need the whole environment to allow you to have an electric car and live in a certain area.
In an electric car, you need to have charging infrastructure must become so common that to go, we often say, do you think about refueling your car?
Not even. It's like a reflex.
It's so mundane. It's so boring that you take your car, go to the station, petrol, and leave.
But it's less frequent. You do it far less, so it's also
Even if you were to do it frequently, it is so mundane.
Yeah.
But to do the same on an electric car it's not as
it's
boring.
much harder, but it's much harder.
Because so many factors you need to consider, and it is still difficult currently.
Yeah.
As a result, I had the chance to speak to the head of sales of the Benelux region of a very big car company recently, and he told me that 90% of all electric car sales that are being done are for corporates. 90% of all sales by private consumers are still gasoline cars.
Wow.
Yes, it is easy to convince corporates. Why? Because you have legislations like greening corporate fleets that is going to push all corporates to only use electric vehicles as part of their fleet strategies. So you can convince corporates, you can convince the Greens, you can convince rich people who don't have a commute beyond Ixelles, Chatelain, and Saint-Gilles, or maybe nearby.
Yeah.
How will you convince someone who lives in Usser, in Afflehampton,
Yeah, like
Cortenberg?
50 miles away.
Not happening.
There's no way.
Because they have to travel, because they have to move around, they have to do things.
So at first you had to
So
be
my
part of it.
opinion,
You
yes,
had
to come back was, I was extremely on team electric cars. It's the future, it has to go, it should be the way. I joined the industry and I realized that the industry is only viewed as this monster that's just shooting petrol and shooting CO2 in the air the entire time. But after you join the industry, you realize the industry are also people. They are also struggling. They want to build cars. They want to build electric cars. They have a fleet of electric cars that they're building. Consumers don't buy. So the person working in the line in the factory is losing their job because the company is not making money. They're shutting down factories. So what people don't see is the human aspect of the industry. They only see the industry as Mercedes-Benz, Rolls-Royce, CEOs walking around with suits of money. No, there are so many people behind this. When you work in the industry and when you work with people like this on a daily basis, you realize that they are struggling. You realize that this is an issue. And when you go outside of your primary privileged environment to the rural parts of Czechia, to the rural parts of Poland, these people will not buy electric cars.
because they can't also,
Exactly,
because
can't.
that's a big issue.
And it's too expensive for them. They don't get the range that they have. They just don't want to adapt because the infrastructure is not there and it's not cheap. People still say that it's very cheap. Maybe it is if you have the certain kind of charger, if you slow charge it in your house across the entire night. But how many people have slow chargers in a building with 200 apartments? There's going to be 5 chargers for so many people. And if each apartment has a car, you won't have the infrastructure. It's very difficult to convince these people to get on board. To have fast charging and this is just with respect to cars. With respect to trucks, that's a different story.
Trucks is even harder. Yeah.
Trucks is so hard. Trucks is so hard. My goodness, it takes, because the thing is,
Because it's so heavy, it needs a bigger battery. It's even more expensive and stuff like that, or not even to that extent.
No. I'm happy to explain this. It's very simple thing. Is that there's a very, very big truck company CEO. He says something, and I really like it. He often says, you buy a car with your heart, you buy a truck with your calculator. Because cars are parked 90% of the time of their lifetimes. Trucks are only parked 10%.
They keep on driving.
They keep on driving. Every time you park a truck is money that you could have made. If you are now going to park a truck to charge for 5 hours, 6 hours during the day, just so you can make that range, you are losing a lot of money, which could be fine if you had 15,000, 20,000 trucks. But around 70 to 80% of all truck companies and road transport or freight transport operators are small operators, meaning they have less than 10 trucks. So if you have 10 trucks and one of them is stuck because it has to charge, it's a problem.
Yeah.
You lose money very quickly, and if 2 of them are stuck, 3 of them are stuck, so it is difficult, and you need charging stations for this. To ensure that you can charge a truck from 0 to 100%, you need something called megawatt charging. So there are different speeds at which you charge. A megawatt charger will ensure that you can charge a truck from 0 to 100% during lunchtime, 45 minutes. That sounds very reasonable. How many megawatt chargers do you think we currently have in Europe?
I don't even know.
0.
0 at all. So it's like a slower system that we have, but it doesn't allow you to have 1 megawatt.
You need to have 1 megawatt of electricity that comes into your truck so that you can charge it in 45 minutes.
But we don't have this yet.
We have 0 stations at the moment.
But we have stations, but they just don't go that fast.
Yeah.
So what's the speed? Do you know?
At the moment, I think the fastest that I've seen is around 300 kilowatts.
Okay, so a third.
third of that. So basically, it would take 4 hours to charge a truck.
Yeah, so I heard that now people like charge it to like 70% only because it's fast.
Yes.
And then it's the remaining 30% that takes much longer.
Works for cars, but for trucks, you need the remaining 30% as well. And you know what? I have spoken to truck drivers who tell me they like electric trucks because it's less tiresome, easier to drive, less vibrations, more comfortable, fast, zippy. They really like these things, but they won't adopt it. Why? Because they can't drive it. Yeah. How many charging stations are there that has megawatt? One of my colleagues was at an event about a week ago, where he said that that was the first megawatt charging station that was launched in, I think it was in north of Italy, and he said he saw the charging station come up. It reached 1 megawatt, but that's a very rare situation right now, and you can't park a truck for 4 hours just so that it charges and you can go this far. People will not adapt to it.
Yeah, that's a very complicated situation that we're in, but let's hope that innovation allows us to...
And to wrap up finally is that this is where I went from being a green electric car to now be like, electric is the future, no question, but it may not be the present.
Yeah, it's going to take a long time.
I often give a comparison to 5G. 5G technology, 5G spectrum, 5G antennas were first present everywhere, and then people started using it. Infrastructure will always lead acceptability and adoptability.
Of course, but we're doing the opposite now.
Yes, everybody are trying to push electric cars when you don't have infrastructure. When it's or it is present, but it is not present as much. But the problem is, there is no target for an infrastructure provider to make 100,000 chargers, 50,000 chargers. If not, the infrastructure providers will be fined X billion euros. You know who gets fined? The auto industry. If you don't make X amount of cars.
Yeah, it's the companies that pay for it.
Yes. If you don't produce these amount of cars, you will be fined.
That's crazy.
And every single manufacturer that I've spoken to, especially in commercial vehicles, they have series and series of trucks. They're saying, listen, if you want an electric truck, we have all these. You have an electric bus? We have all these. They are ready. They are ready to be produced. But who's buying it?
Nobody.
People don't want to buy it yet. Because there are no charging stations. You buy a truck, okay, you charge it at your house, you drive 400 kilometers, there's no charging station. Then what do you do?
So first infrastructure, and then
Yes.
accessibility and
then adaptability.
yeah, adaptability. Okay, that's a great transition to talk about, I guess, the whole EU mobility transition plan that you, I guess, have to focus on. So are you aware of the goals of this mobility plan? Could you give us some big lines of within which time frame they want to actually like make this happen, even though it looks like it's going to be very hard? Yeah, curious to know.
For trucks, I can speak because I work closely on trucks. Cars, I should have some numbers, but I'm not sure. I hope they are accurate. But it's basically something on the lines of, you have timelines. For 2025, you need to make sure that I think it is around 15% of all cars that you are producing are electric.
15% by 2025
Yes.
for all car manufacturing companies.
So I think that's the target that's currently being set. This changes, I believe, to 55% of cars that are being sold should be electric by 2030, and I think by the Fit for 55 plan. So by 2055, there should be no more electric cars, no more combustion cars being present over here. That's the long-term vision.
Okay.
For trucks, if you look at it, those numbers I have, we need to have 45% of all trucks that are being produced needs to become fully electric by 2030. So, and this is based on 2019 levels. So if you're saying that in 2019 there were 1 million cars being produced, 450,000 cars, trucks. If in 2019 there were 1 million trucks produced, that means by 2030, 450,000 cars that are being registered every year must be electric. This target then changes. It becomes 65% of all trucks being produced by 2035 must be fully electric, and 90% should be fully electric by 2040.
Wow.
So it might seem achievable.
That was my next question. Because you mentioned 15% of cars should be electric by 2025, which is this year. Have we managed to hit this goal first?
No.
No.
No, because if you look at registrations and vehicle sales, this is the problem.
Because people don't buy it. Corporate cars do help, but
Year on year, month on month, quarter on quarter, the total number of electric vehicles being registered is continuously coming down.
really,
This is an issue.
since when? Because it was increasing for the
It
last few
increased, I
years.
think,
When,
let's say,
when did it start decreasing?
off the top of my head, don't quote me,
No, but around
2022.
around 2020.
2022, 2023, after that, it's been steadily coming down because you've convinced the green people to buy your cars, they have bought it. You've convinced corporates to buy your cars, they have bought it. And now it is about convincing the general people who can't afford to buy an electric car. You know, a very well-intentioned, high-ranking executive I met recently, I asked him, how can you convince people living in villages, people living in rural areas who don't want to buy electric cars to switch to electrification? Because if you don't attract these people, you're not going to meet your targets. Their response was, our cars don't cater to these people.
Our cars don't
Cater to these people. We have a certain section of cars that have very good charging, very good range, very good cars, amazing everything. So our customers are very happy if they buy this. So we are catering to our customers. Okay, that's an interesting way to say it, because what if I am not your customer? What if I cannot afford your car? How people don't consider the fact that a lot of people can't afford to buy an expensive electric car, so that it can match the same amount of usage and utility that a combustion engine vehicle gives me. So I had the I have to say misfortune of taking a very average electric car from Brussels to Czechia over Christmas. So it's a long journey, and I remember we left at I think it was a Thursday morning 9 a.m. and reached Friday morning 8:30, because there were a lot of hindrances. Charging cables don't work, car doesn't support, range is not good enough, it stops. And my friend, a very dear friend of mine, very well intentioned, he just said, no, why didn't you just rent a Tesla instead? And I was like, yeah, why didn't you give me €1,000 instead? I could have rented a Tesla. The point is, people can't afford it.
Yeah, exactly.
So you need to consider this part as well. And to answer your questions, if I can give you data for trucks, because that's what I work more closely with than for cars. So we have at the moment a zero emission vehicle market share. So a zero emission vehicle is
Electric, 100%.
pure electric, battery
Yeah,
electric,
yeah, yeah.
zero electric vehicle. I think at, what was it? This year's registration was 3,492 vehicles, which is a lot, you think. But you know what is in terms of percentage? It's 1.2%.
1.2% of trucks.
1.2% of trucks that were registered this year are zero electric. 96% of trucks that were sold were diesel.
And in 5 years, 2030, we need 45% of trucks. So we need to go from 1.2% to 45% in 5 years.
That is a 1,043% year-on-year increase you need to have, with a consistent annual growth rate on the percentage about 71%. So if I need to make sure that, so that number comes out to, you need to have 400,000 zero emission vehicles on the road by 2030 for trucks.
Wow.
Today we have 3,492. Let's be generous. Let's call it 4,000. We have 4,000 vehicles now. We need to reach 400,000. So you need to grow by 1,000% this year, times 70% every single year until 2030 to make sure you can reach the first target. Then you have the second target in 2035. Then you have the third target in 2040. So this growth must continuously be there, for which you need to people need to buy vehicles. But if you look at on the other side, to enable the uptake of these 400,000 vehicles, you need charging stations. Yeah. And right now there are 0 megawatt charging stations.
So if we talk about solutions, the very first step to take is to put charging stations everywhere and invest in also the speed of charging, right?
This is what I...
It's the two biggest issues.
Yes, if you look at countries that have done it, I'm not for trucks, but I know, for example, for cars, Scandinavian countries, Norway especially, they have a I mean, this was what, 10 years ago, but they had the maximum number of electric vehicles being sold. Tesla has a huge presence in Norway. Everybody buys an electric vehicle. And it's because the government incentivized it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the government basically said 10 or 15 years ago, if you buy an electric car, charging is free. You never have to pay for charging. Wow. So that's basically like buying a gas car and saying you can just go to the tank, fill it up, and not pay. Yeah. That was, I believe this was the law. I could be wrong, but I remember reading about this. If this was the case, this is how you incentivize people. You don't have tax. Yeah. You're not paying any excess tax because you're using a non-polluting vehicle, and charging was free for it. So people want to buy it because the running costs disappear. Initial costs are there, but they go away.
Sustainable or more interesting financially.
Yes. So incentives. Governments need to come forward. They need to incentivize infrastructure producers to create this infrastructure, because if it's not a business case for them, they will not do it, which is fully understandable from a capitalist perspective. And if it's not a business case, if there are no charging stations, people will not want to buy them. So you need to incentivize, government needs to come forward, create whatever, they are doing it, but I think they have to be way more generous, considering we pay 52% in taxes just in Belgium. And
let's not talk about this.
So if I'm paying 52%, I don't want my entire street to have 2 charging points.
Yeah.
Every single parking spot should have a charging station next to it. Otherwise, you can't electrify. It's difficult.
Yeah, it's very difficult targets to just reach. It's definitely not going to be achieved. So they should definitely revise it in a way, but or help, I guess, those companies to bring the cost down also. But I guess first, obviously, charging stations everywhere, innovating in the charging speed, and then making it more accessible financially wise to the people. Yep. Those are, I guess, the 3 big solutions to focus on if we ever want to reach those targets. But it's going to take so much money and debt, and in the geopolitical context that we're in, it's probably not going to happen, right?
It should happen.
But it
should happen. And car companies are not climate change deniers. They're not walking around saying, oh, look, there's snow, so there's no climate change happening. Everybody's on board for electrification. Everybody's electrifying cars. Everybody's investing it. Everybody believes that electric is the future. Just that the matter, it's difficult right now. Give us a bit more time.
Yeah.
Help us with some leeway so that people start adopting and then we start using. So when activists think of car companies as, oh, they are the worst, all they do is pollute, it's not the case. Everybody's changing. Thing is, if you don't adopt, your competitors will crush you. The number of absolutely amazing electric vehicles coming from China entering our shores is a real problem. The amount of features that they can provide, for the prices that they have, for the range that they have, they are going to take over the market very quickly. So just from a pure economic and a competition perspective, OEMs also want to electrify. They are doing it. Yeah. I mean, Ferrari is making a hybrid. That would not be possible 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
Of course, even Lamborghini.
Yes, they're making hybrids, and they want to make... Porsche is making fully electric, Taycan? And it's super fast, very nice cars. Don't tell me we are not interested in electrification. The industry is very much on board.
Everybody's for it. So hopefully we get there.
Yes.
Let's be optimistic in this world of bad news all over. Right. Does every new initiative by the EU Commission have to be voted by the Parliament every time? Or because there is the Commission on one side, there is the Parliament on the other, there are those companies that sometimes, cannot follow those new rules that are going to be implemented. Does every new initiative suggested by the Commission have to be voted by the Parliament?
So to answer this question, take a step back and look at it's called the ordinary legislative procedure. How does legislation flow through the EU institutions? Let's look at that. So the Commission reserves the right to propose a legislation, which makes it the most powerful body of all 3 institutions, because the Commission basically wakes up one morning and decides, hey, I want to regulate digital markets. I want to regulate chemical markets. I want to do this or do that. And they can propose a legislation. But of course, even there are some nuances to it. The commission just not really wakes up one morning and proposes something. They start, they speak to civil society. They speak to people who are interested and say, hey, listen, we are thinking about coming up with a certain legislation. What do you think? A good example I can give you is, I believe it was in 2023, a legislation, or there's currently something called PFAS. It is a polyperfluoroalkyl. It's a certain chemical substance which is considered to be a persistent pollutant. And so the European Commission is deciding to ban the presence of PFAS in the entire continent. The problem is PFAS is so ubiquitous, it's present in so many places, it is so difficult for you to, like PFAS is there on this microphone, on my tablet, it is there anywhere and everywhere you imagine. Because it's primarily used, again, my knowledge of this is not as extensive as my colleagues, but it is used as, say, anything that repels water, any coating, any surface that has a water repelling technology has some level of PFAS in it. And they want to make sure that this disappears, except giving exceptions for medical reasons and certain specific requirements, which is understandable. But it affects the way industries work at a fundamental level. So what do? They realize, but the legislation for this has still not been proposed. But they thought about it.
They drafted it.
They drafted an idea. This is what we are thinking. What do you think? So they asked.
They're consulting civil society companies. Could it be possible to do without?
Yes. They asked someone called the European Chemicals Agency, the ECHA. They are the chief chemicals authority for the EU. Mm-hmm. So they asked them to conduct a survey. So ECHA proposed a certain draft regulation saying, okay, these are the chemicals we want to ban, and this is what we think it will do for the environment. What do you think? So they put out what is called a public consultation. In this case, what they were, ECHA put a public consultation, I don't know for what time it was, but on the day at which the consultation ended, take a guess, how many responses do you think they got?
Definitely not a lot, because of the process of consultation that is like nobody hears from it. They don't do any communications around it. It's so hard to find it in the first place. So I would definitely bet, like, I don't know, 3% of companies saw it.
No, yes, they do. But on average, like public consultation that I've worked on, mm-hmm. if it's an interesting topic, you maybe get 100, 150, maybe 500 responses.
But it's targeted, right? You're targeting an audience of companies or people that work in a certain field?
It's not necessarily targeted per se. For example, this legislation, or this particular piece of draft legislation on the chemicals, was just put out to everyone.
Everyone within the EU.
Whoever thinks it affects you, please tell us why.
So we're talking about millions of people as an audience.
So
and how many answers did they get?
So they got 8,000 responses, which is insane. Trust me, because on average, a consultation gets any response. This is not from individuals, this is from associations and companies.
Okay.
No, it's not me typing a survey.
Yeah.
It's my association. So the auto industry, the railway industry, the paint industry, the shipping industry. So you have industries like this has come forward to give responses to public consultation. So on average, when the commission makes something, you get, say, 30, 40 responses. If it's an important file, a lot of more chatter is happening around it, 300, 400, 500 responses.
Yeah.
8,000 responses is unprecedented, to the point that ECHA was supposed to get back to us with their draft proposal after reading through all the feedback that they got. Within, I think it was 3 or 6 months, they just said, no timeline, we will get back to you when we can. Because there are too many responses, we now need to read through all of these, and then only we can tell the commission what is feasible or not. So the commission, before they actually make a legislation come to life, they do public consultations. Mm-hmm. They speak to civil society, they get a first idea, and then they make a draft regulation.
Okay.
It is very important to target the formulation of the legislation. If you can, the earlier you influence, the better your chances are of shaping the entire process. So this often happens. So after it is targeted over there, and then the draft legislation is published, a part of it goes to the parliament, or basically the same thing goes to the parliament and same thing goes to the council. It needs to be approved independently in parliament and independently in council.
Approved by the council, voted by the parliament.
Approved by the council, that's one text. Approved by the parliament, that's another text. And then both of them combined should be voted by the parliament.
It's there's votation on both sides.
On both sides.
Ah, okay.
The council also should have, because the council represents the member states, they will have their own versions. So
But this isn't done in private, isn't it?
council voting, I believe, happens in private, but parliament you can definitely track it. So you'll have the commission proposal, you'll have the council amendments, you will have the parliament amendments, and then all these are taken into consideration. Negotiations happen.
By the commission.
Commission is a mediator.
Okay.
So within the council, each member state, for the presidency, right now I think it's the Polish presidency. So the Polish presidency will pick up a particular file and say, we are the mediators of this particular file. All 27 member states will sit down and they will take each and every text and say, the Polish believe this is okay. Greeks will come and say, no, this is not okay. Germans will say. So that is negotiation happening within the council.
They need unanimity?
Yes. Within the council, they have to agree on a certain text. They say, this is
All
what
of them.
everybody should. So that is the final text that will come from a council. Then you have a similar final text that comes from the parliament. Within the parliament, you have internal negotiations within committees. You have an industry committee, an economics committee, an environment committee, health committee, so on and so forth. So based on what the file is, if it's a environment file, it goes probably to the environment committee or the industry and environment committee, so on and so forth. And even within over here is where politics plays a role, because if the environment committee is headed by a conservative, their opinion on the environment is very different compared to the committee if it's headed by a Greens party or a left, and so on. So this is where politics becomes important, and therefore who you target, who you speak to is how the legislation is being formulated. But at the absolute end of the day, the parliament must vote on the final text. Because if you think about it, the parliament is the only body that is truly represented by the people.
Exactly.
You vote for the parliament. You don't vote for council. You don't vote for commission. So it has to be passed in parliament.
But then it has to be passed in the council.
The council has a text. Parliament has a text.
But those texts can't be the same?
No.
They don't have to be the same?
Not necessarily. They can have their different. That's where compromise text. That's why you have something called trilogues.
But in what sense? It doesn't have to be the same.
A certain member state would not like this. Certain member state would like something else. There are smaller nuances of.
So, for example, those countries are going to do this, but those countries are not going to do this.
So they will not vote on a particular text.
Okay. It's not going to impact certain countries.
Yes.
The council is going to agree to keep Greece away from it, for example.
Yeah.
Whereas the parliament is going to enforce this for all companies of all the other countries.
There's a lot of political bargaining as well. So let's say that a file on environment is extremely important for Germany, Sweden, Scandinavia, and Western Europe. The same file is not as important for Southern Europe, Italy, Portugal, Spain, and so on. But a file on fisheries becomes very important for them and not for the others. So they start bargaining. At that point of time, because they don't have the amount of support, member states like Germany or someone else would come and say, listen, we will vote for you for your file to pass through because we realize it's important for you if you give us your support for this.
Wow.
Then the countries for which the file is important to will modify it, will change it in a manner that it benefits them, and they need to get support on board. After you do this, you have only the council text. Similarly, you have the parliament text. But within the parliament, it's more about an MEP, an individual. So you speak to them. It's very difficult to influence at council level because they are experts from the member state. Mm-hmm. They are less from the EU per se. Yeah. They are part of the EU.
But it's all the representative people from the governments.
The parliamentarian is who you elected. So you speak to them individually and then you convince them. Over there, they will listen to you because you have arguments, and not all parliamentarians are experts in the field that you want. But the parliamentarians, they also have constraints, is that they have constraints to their member state, to their voters, and of course to their political parties. So an EPP person would not be interested in voting for an excessively green law, so on and so forth. So you have these things. So of course, parliament becomes very important, and this is how the legislation flows. There are people who have much more expertise than I do. This is how I understood it. So if this works for me,
it gives a very good understanding of the whole situation, despite the complexity.
It is very complex. It's very complex.
Let's get into maybe what we mentioned earlier a little, which is the innovation versus regulation. Obviously, we are in Europe, in the EU, which is called by the whole world the regulator of the world, compared to the US and Asia, who keep on innovating so much with far less regulations. We have a commission here that is growing and growing in size, with European schools that are getting built everywhere. It's like there's so many people that are working for the EU now, and it keeps on growing. So my question is, what are your general thoughts on, is the EU regulating more than innovating, or are they, because they used to regulate a lot until now, maybe there's a new path for us? So just your general thoughts on this.
I've always been on team regulation.
Yeah?
I think it's important. The reason why technocracies don't exist, wherein governments that are led by the smartest people in the world. So you don't have, it is nice to have a doctor in the health ministry, but if your health ministry is only filled with doctors, they have a very myopic view of what the health ministry needs to do, and therefore there are a lot of people who tend to miss out. So putting only experts at the head of government is great for innovation, but then it will not take together the entire community forward, because a regulation is a regulation, or even a politician represents the people who have also not voted for them, who have not chosen to be a part of this. So it's as important to take that forward. I think Europe does a good job, in spite of being a regulator at this moment, is that they look for the lowest common denominator to see how a policy takes everyone together and everyone forward. So this is my view.
Yeah.
Of course, this comes at the lack of some innovation, but I think the overall growth in terms of quality of life, having stuff like work-life balance, having good healthcare, access to healthcare. Yes, its taxes are high, and I don't want to pay so much taxes, but there are some benefits to this, and this comes only because of regulation. Okay, do you lose innovation for regulation? Probably you do. Probably you do. But it's that old American adage, where I would rather have 1,000 guilty men free than have one innocent person in prison. I would rather have a legislation that is over-regulated, that makes sure every individual benefits from it, than have a lesser regulated legislation but where a certain section,
10% that have
everyone and everybody else are left out. Yeah. So this is my Benthamite perspective on this. Not a lot of people would agree, but I think it's good that we have a regulator that people still give importance to. People still, I wouldn't say are, considering Elon Musk and Trump and their tones, they're not afraid of EU, but they are definitely annoyed by the EU. They don't like it. They're like, oh, you're stopping us. Oh, you're doing these things. They don't want to change it because it doesn't work with them. But it works. EU people are happy. It's compared to the US, way less shootings in school, for example.
The way we do things has nothing to do with how they want it to work.
Exactly.
Sure. We live in very interesting times indeed, by the way, those days. Anyway, thank you for that. Let's get into the last part of the podcast, which is, I guess, giving tips to everyone who would maybe want to become a lobbyist one day. So for anyone that would want to join the EU bubble, work as a lobbyist, or maybe in any other country, work as a lobbyist, what are the skills that you think are required to excel at the job?
Have you watched Ratatouille?
Yes.
Great movie.
Yes.
And Anton Ego, the critic, when he reviews the restaurant that Remy cooked a meal for him later in the end, and that he says a line, which I'm going to paraphrase now, where he says, not everyone can become a great lobbyist, but a great lobbyist can come from anywhere.
Okay, so you don't need any particular skill?
You don't need any particular skills. You don't need to have studied only this, only that, only these things. So look, qualification lobbyist can be anything. You have people, I remember I met someone who works in educational policy, whose background was in physiotherapy.
Wow.
Like, how did you get in? Started as an intern, worked my way. Oh, I like this, so I moved. That's pretty much it. So, and you see, it's nice to have an understanding of the legal issues present, but then a lot of lobbyists as well, who work a lot more on policy side, are PhD people, are economists. They are very much into their subject, into what, be it environment, be it sustainability, and then they have an understanding of the legislation. So it's not that you study this, you can become a lobbyist. You don't study this, no. You do whatever you want.
Exactly. So compared to the very classic commission path of like wanting, for example, to become whatever, like let's say a diplomat. You want to become a diplomat. You have a very, very structured path, I guess, to become a diplomat in terms of studies, in terms of then the internship that you're going to do, the jobs, etc. A bit like lawyers, like there's many jobs that you have to follow a certain path. But I feel like for lobbyists, you don't have any path. You can take any path, basically, and it will potentially take you there. You don't have special studies, special courses to become a lobbyist, right?
Not yet. I know that some people are introducing modules in European education, European law, and of course, you know the famous, the college, everybody who goes to the College of Europe, entitled to believe that they have a job in Brussels waiting for them the moment they come out. But in reality, it's not the case because you have so much competition happening. But I've heard that in the College of Europe or institutions like this, they are thinking about public affairs as an academic requirement or part of the coursework to ensure people to become effective lobbyists the moment they join. So this is definitely being considered.
So if you were to give tips to anyone in terms of like how to train yourself up, how to practice those skills, maybe to become a good lobbyist, what do you have to do? Do you have to network a lot? Do you have to just get out there and like negotiate with people? Do you have to be a salesperson? Do you also have to like, you know, be a very like law and policy fan?
You have to read.
You have to read.
This is my opinion, is that anybody can go out and talk, but not everybody can go out and talk with substance. You are respected when you know more. There are a lot of lobbyists who get away and get by just doing networking. But any respectable lobbyist that you meet really, really knows what they're talking about because they have sat there and they have studied and they have spent enormous amount of time understanding the nuances of their legislation. They may not have the level of expertise. For example, I work at an industry association, so I will never have the level of expertise that my members have because my members who are coming from the car and truck and bus companies work in these technical regulations on a daily basis. They know what gram of CO2, what amount of composition of this. I don't know those things. But the more time I spend with them, even if I often say that my experts are at university and I am in preschool. That's the level of expertise difference that we have. But when you spend time with them, if you go from preschool to a high schooler in terms of the knowledge that you have, you already have way more knowledge than a lot other lobbyists in your same field. Reading, there's networking is an important aspect. Networking is essential. It is important in the Brussels bubble for you to get the right jobs, for you to maneuver, to have the accessibility, and it helps when you have somebody call and give you a good word saying, yes, take the guy, he's good. It worked for me. People have vouched for me, which is the reason why I'm where I am over here. So it does work for people, but I was always advised to read, to be good.
To know your folder.
Really know it. You may only have one or two files and people even might think it's a useless file that it doesn't, because in the auto industry, for example, there are a lot of, you only hear about charging, electricity, infrastructure, because these are, as we say, these are the sexy files. But there are a lot more files that affect so many people that people don't care.
And that's where you differentiate yourself, maybe, is by becoming an expert in all of those things around.
Yes.
If you had to still imagine the perfect path for anyone that is 18 years old, that is dreaming about, you know, having an impact in a certain field, helping those companies shape the policies of the future, what would be the ideal studies that this person could do?
If I had to restart my career, and I've thought about this several times, and if I wanted to tailor it to work in the EU, the first thing I would do is I would do economics. I think it is super fundamental to understand finances, data, the way numbers work per se from a basic level, and then applying this economic strategy to any industry. Every industry is based on economics, economic modeling, and how these things work. So you need to have that core focus. After that, you do any legal studies, because every place I've met a lot of people in the commission. There are too many lawyers in the commission. There are not a lot of economists. Everywhere they feel this, and when you read legal text your entire time, that's great. There are enough lawyers and artificial intelligence is also there to make economics work easy and to make legal work easy. But I think I'm repeating myself over here at this point, that if I had to start again, a base in economics, then a master's in a legal policy area that you like.
Legal policy area.
Yes.
But then you need a few years of experience to become a lobbyist. No, you have to work first in maybe certain areas, or can you straight away coming out of the master's get the job?
I know someone who I really am envious of. This person, I think it was, she and I both joined the firm that I joined first when I moved to Brussels. So when I joined, I was 28, and she joined, I think it was 3 months after her 21st birthday. So she finished her bachelor's. She finished her bachelor's and joined straight in. Worked in the same firm for 3.5, 4 years. I think she also finished her master's in the meantime. So she's 24, 25 now. She's already an account manager.
Yeah, she has
So she's
4 years of experience.
For 4 or 5 years of experience. By the time she's 30, 31, she's already a policy director.
Wow. But this is very rare.
It is not, yes.
You saw this, but it's not common at all.
It's not common. And I think it's both a combination of her being in the right place at the right time and also knowing what she wants.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of people are very much in the, I have to explore, I have to go out, I have to see this, and then I'll figure out what I want. If you know what you want, or if you are guided in a way that you already want, she has a phenomenal head start. Just by being in the environment, for having already been there for 5 years, reaching a mid-managerial position, and she's only 25, within 6-7 years, she'll be somewhere. By the time she's in her early 40s, she'd be one of the most reputed, respected lobbyists around, because she'll have 20 years of experience at 40 years of age.
You mentioned policy director as what she could become at 31, 32 years old. That sounds like it's the goal of a lot of lobbyists to reach that point. Is it the high, step that everybody dreams of reaching one day?
Dreams, I don't know. I think everybody would want to be Secretary General, as you would say. That would be the CEO of your association. But policy directors are the ones who steer the conversation.
Okay.
They are the start and the end of everything on a particular piece of legislation.
Okay, they are at the core of all the discussions from A to Z.
They are the ones in the front. They handle the political aspects of it. They handle the technical aspects of it. Because when you work for a policy director, they will give you a particular piece of legislation for you to handle the everyday firefighting negotiations. Because the firefighting conversations are often small technical details that you will work with the commission. But after a certain point of time, it stops being about technicalities, it starts being about what the politicians want. At that point in time, it is the policy director's job to make sure that they can coordinate with politicians, with the commission, because they have the experience. So they are, and above the policy director, of course, you often have the Secretary General, who has an understanding of, if not a deep understanding of the policy files, but an extremely deep understanding of politics. And they negotiate every file everywhere with everyone.
How do you manage to find those jobs out there to become a lobbyist? Is there a website where everything is transparent and you have all those jobs that follow a certain regulation, a bit like the commission does? Or can you also find your way around by networking with people, by connecting on LinkedIn, by sending a spontaneous, application?
I'll tell you what worked for me. Networking is important. It is definitely essential to try and reach out to people on LinkedIn. You get ghosted a lot. A lot of people don't respond to you, no matter how well-intentioned your messages are, because there's so many people asking for these messages, so many people putting themselves out there. I read recently somewhere, and I think I agree with this a lot more, is that you need to stop sending applications, you need to start attracting people to you. So you need to develop your expertise, your niche, start publishing it, start putting it out there, and then slowly people will reach out to you to get the job. This is how things work, or rather, I believe things are working these days. When I was still applying, it was, there are certain websites, of course, where you can apply, and jobs are arriving every single day. There's a LinkedIn page called Jobs in Brussels, which really helped me to find the right jobs. There's the traditional. This is something that I often say is that if you see a job on LinkedIn, you're probably not going to get it.
No, there's too many applicants in the first place. It's crazy.
It's the most common place for you to look for jobs. So everybody's on LinkedIn looking for a job. It's very difficult for you to make your application stand out on LinkedIn. Look for other websites. There's Jobs in Brussels, there's Euro Brussels, there's eujobs.co, there's Euroactive, a couple of other people in the bubble know about these websites. People outside the bubble, they only know LinkedIn and they search on LinkedIn. So look at places outside of these where you can find them. And of course, through your network is always a very cool thing to do. Because if somebody's hiring, they put an ad out. One of somebody in your network just clicks a like or gives a comment of it, you see it in your notification and you see, oh, they're hiring, and then you apply. So that's definitely a way to go forward. I think to make applications, a traditional method is still the way, but to get your application pushed forward, networking becomes important.
Yeah. Okay. Or reaching out on top of your application and by email, by whatever.
I would appreciate that. I have done that.
But some people reject this process.
Some people don't like it. They're like, no, we have to maintain fairness and bias. So if I talk to you right now, I will have an opinion about you before I see you on the interview. So I'm not going to talk to you right now.
So it can also be a risk.
Yes, I see their point. But for me personally, if I was a recruiter and somebody sent me an application and then reached out to me and asked me for a coffee, I would see it as initiative. Oh, that's nice. The person is coming forward. They really want the job. They like the job. That already puts me in a good position. Yeah. So I don't have, and not everybody agrees the same. And I don't have to spend the first 15, 20 minutes of the interview saying, tell me about yourself. Where are you? What are you? I've already spoken to you at a coffee. I know what to test you on.
Yeah. And spontaneous applications versus normal process, very, very low chances of making it.
Just because there's so much competition, a spontaneous application has never worked for me.
Never worked, yeah. And you've never met anyone that became a lobbyist, from a...
Oh, no, that I've met. I've met people who have lobbied their way into their first job.
Really? Okay, so it is possible also.
It is possible. It is, but it's not as it's not as common, I want to say. Yeah, traditional methods. Yeah. And then get someone to vouch for you. Like Rory vouched for me. You need to find your Rory.
And last question, you have to be based in Brussels, right? If you want to be a lobbyist and work within the EU, or do you also have lobbyists based in other countries of the EU, I suppose?
The further you go away from the geographical area of Brussels, the less access you have to daily conversations, networking, meeting the right kind of people, being in that environment. So if you don't marinate in that environment, it's difficult for you to get that job over here, which is why it becomes very difficult for people like me who are non-EU, non-dual national people to stand out from afar to enter Brussels compared to a lot of Europeans who I've spoken to, and I asked them, so how did you find your job in Brussels? How did you move? They just say, I was chilling in Genoa by the seaside, going surfing. I realized, oh, my summer's over, I have to find a job. So I just packed my bags and moved to Brussels. But I can't do that. Yeah. So being in the environment makes a tremendous difference.
Nice. And all of those applicants that are trying to become lobbyists, they are already based in Brussels, or they're applying from far away and they're okay to move, but it's going to be a long process?
I mean, if you're not European, it's not a long process at all. Then it's an easy move for you. You just have to like the job that you're applying. Yeah. And a lot of companies also, they specifically mention that we are an inclusive employer, everybody's welcome, everybody's this. But then, no, we will not sponsor your visa. It doesn't cost a lot. It costs 180 euros to sponsor your visa. That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
I think 180 euros companies can definitely afford.
Yeah, completely. And last question, languages. Obviously, Brussels is kind of French-speaking, kind of Flemish-speaking also, but the EU seems to be very English-speaking mainly. Do you feel like it's an add-on, it's an advantage to speak other languages, or if you master English only, you can still become a great lobbyist?
I have to thank my former colonizers for having left the country with a good English-speaking heritage in this regard, which is why my entire education, schooling, kindergarten, university was always in English. So this is the reason why I can work in Brussels without having to speak French or German or Flemish or whatever the other languages. The institutions are primarily work in English, but to join the institution, you need to know another language.
One other European language. Which one do you know?
I can speak conversational German.
Okay,
That's pretty much it.
nice.
But because of Berlin and living there.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
if you ask me to explain a particular piece of legislation to a parliamentarian in German, I will tap out and say no.
No. You would just listen.
It is understandable in a certain way because if you want somebody to join the EU institutions, they need to speak a European language.
Of course, yeah.
I see your point. But to work in adjacent to EU institutions, you don't need to speak. I also know that a lot of people, for example, our friends from the UK who joined the Commission before they spoke, before Brexit, did not have to speak anything because they spoke English, which was a qualified European language. So they needed, if they spoke something else, great. But if you didn't, you're still British, you're still welcome. So that's fine. So they were able to move in, but the same luxury will not be afforded to new entrants such as myself. If I want to join the Commission someday, I will have to pick up a language.
Perfect. Well, I'm out of questions. So big thanks to you.
Thank you very much, Seb. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks to you. Thanks to everyone for watching, and see you maybe in the next podcast.
I wish you good luck, and I hope this thing keeps going on well, and you have a lot more great discussions with all the people. Thank you very much for having me as your first guest.
Thank you so much, Tanveer.